Podbean, your message amplified.
Ready to share your message with the world? Start your podcast journey with Podbean.
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 Podbean. Podbean, the AI-powered all-in-one podcast platform.
Thousands of businesses and enterprises trust Podbean to launch their podcasts.
Launch your podcast on Podbean today.
My school uses Podbean.
My church, too.
I love it. I really do.
You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium. Available on Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean, and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is called What Were the Ghost Rockets? So it's over to you now, Mark, for this week's rocketing story.
Ghost rockets, which are also known as the Scandinavian ghost rockets, were rocket or missile-shaped unidentified flying objects that were sighted in the skies, mostly in Sweden and other nearby countries, in the mid-1940s. The first reports of these ghost rockets were made on the 26th of February back in 1946 by Finnish observers, and about 2,000 sightings in total were logged between the May and December of that same year, with them peaking between the 9th and 11th of August, and with over 200 sightings being verified by either radar returns or authorities recovering physical fragments. The debate still continues even today as to the origins of these unidentified ghost rockets. However, in 1946, it was thought likely that they originated from the former German rocket facility at Peenemünde, and that they were more than likely long-range tests being conducted by the Soviets of captured German V-1 or V-2 missiles, or perhaps some other early form of cruise missile due to the way they were sometimes seen to manoeuvre. And because of this suspicion, this prompted the Swedish army to issue a directive stating that newspapers were not to report the exact location of the ghost rocket sightings or any other information regarding the direction or speed of the objects. Other investigations into the ghost rocket sightings concluded that many of them were probably caused by meteors. For example, the peaks of the sightings, meaning the aforementioned 9th and 11th of August in 1946, also fall within the peak of the annual Perseid meteor shower. But, according to other reports on the phenomena, most ghost rocket sightings did not occur during meteor shower activity, and furthermore, the sightings displayed characteristics which were inconsistent with meteors, such as the reported manoeuvrability. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this Air Anomaly episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a medium, a ufologist, a true crime buff, and a man with a very dark and disturbed sense of humour who once sent his photograph to a Lonely Hearts Club, only for them to send it back saying that they were not that lonely. But just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every week, usually on a Tuesday night, or occasionally on a day or so later, allowing for bank holidays and busy weekends, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of other paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, serial killers, the darker side of some past celebrities, and the occasional missing person that often goes unnoticed. So if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review or an opinion of the subject episode that I can reply to, a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and hey, hit that notification bell. Or if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again give us a like and a follow, and if you get a few minutes, perhaps you might like to check out my social media groups and pages, including Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok, which are filled daily with all things unexplained and crime. I'll put a link to some of my socials in the description. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the unanswered question, what were the ghost rockets? And this week's necessary disclaimer. Actually, there aren't any disclaimers this week. It is a PG episode. Although, do remember, as with all my shows, that all the opinions and comments are strictly my own, and the facts of the case still remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, when I was in the library the other day and I asked the librarian, if they had any books on paranoia, all she did was whisper to me, "They're right behind you." But anyway, let us get back to the story. The early Soviet origins theory that the ghost rockets were thought to be originated from the former German rocket facility at Peenemünde and were long-range tests by the Soviets of captured German V-1 or V-2 missiles, as I mentioned in my introduction, were rejected by the Swedish, the British and the US military investigators simply because no recognisable rocket fragments were ever found. And according to some sightings, the flying objects in question not only displayed a combination of leaving no exhaust trail and moving too slowly, but they were also flying horizontally, travelling and manoeuvring in formation, and appeared to be silent. These missile-shaped unidentified flying objects most often consisted of a fast-flying rocket or missile-shaped body, either with or without wings, and were visible for only a few seconds. However, there were instances that involved slower-moving, cigar-shaped objects with a hissing or rumbling noise being reported. Crashes were not uncommon, and when they did occur, they would mainly happen in lakes, with some reports stating that some of the objects would propel themselves across the surface of the water before finally sinking. But when the Swedish military performed several dives in the affected lake areas shortly after the crashes, they would find nothing other than occasional craters on the lake bed, along with torn-off aquatic plants. The most known of these crashes occurred on the 19th of July in 1946, which was into Lake Kolmunjärv in Sweden, when witnesses reported that a grey rocket-shaped object with wings came crashing into the lake, with one witness who was interviewed saying that they heard a thunderclap, which they thought was possibly the object exploding. However, after a 3-week military search of the lake and the adjoining areas, nothing was ever found. Immediately after the investigation into Lake Kolmunjärv in Sweden, the Swedish Air Force officer who led the search, Carl Gustav Bartol, submitted a report in which he stated that the bottom of the lake had been disturbed, but nothing was recovered, adding that, and I quote, "There were many indications that the Kolmunjärv object disintegrated itself. The object was probably manufactured in a lightweight material, possibly a kind of magnesium alloy that would disintegrate easily and not give indications on our instruments." And when the Swedish Air Force officer Carl Gustav Bartol was later interviewed in 1984 by the Swedish researcher Claes Van, he again said that their investigation into the ghost rockets suggested that the object largely disintegrated in flight, but insisted that, and again I quote, "what people saw were real, physical objects." On the 10th of October in 1946, the Swedish Defence Staff explicitly stated, and I quote,
"Most observations are vague and must be treated very sceptically. In some cases, however, clear, unambiguous observations have been made that cannot be explained as natural phenomena. Swedish aircraft or imagination on the part of the observer. Echo radar and other equipment registered readings, but gave no clue as to the nature of the objects."
It was also stated by the Swedish Defence Staff that the fragments that were alleged to have come from the Ghost rocket missiles were nothing more than ordinary coke or slag. But approximately 2 months later, on the 3rd of December in 1946, a memo was drafted for the Swedish Ghost Rocket Committee, stating that, and I quote, "Nearly 100 impacts have been reported and 30 pieces of debris have been received and examined by the Swedish National Defence Research Institute," with this debris later being said to have been meteoric fragments, and of the nearly 1,000 reports of the ghost rockets that have been received by the Swedish Defence Staff up to the 29th of November that same year, 225 were considered observations of, and I quote,
"Real physical objects."
with every one of them having been seen in broad daylight. After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at the involvement of the United States government as to the source of the mysterious ghost rockets, and a look into another aerial phenomena that was happening elsewhere at the same time.
Ghost Planet Network, broadcasting from the other side. Ready to tune in to terror? The Ghost Planet Network is your new home for original paranormal content, streaming straight from beyond the veil. We've got it all: spine-tingling stories, chilling documentaries, and real paranormal investigations from the world's most haunted hotspots. Perfect for believers, skeptics, and anyone who loves a good scare. Join the paranormal TV revolution. Get unlimited access for just £12 per year. Tune in now. Email us at neil.hapra@gmail.com to sign up. That's neil.haprc@gmail.com.
In the early August of 1946, Swedish Lieutenant Lennart Neckman of the Defence Staff's Air Defence Division claimed he saw something in the sky that was, and I quote, "without a doubt, a rocket projectile." And on the 14th of August that same year, not only did the New York Times report that the Undersecretary of State, Dean Acheson, was very much interested in the ghost rocket phenomena, but so was the US Army Air Force's intelligence, which was indicated non-publicly by a later documentation.
Podbean, your message amplified.
Ready to share your message with the world? Start your podcast journey with Podbean.
Podbean, the AI-powered all-in-one podcast platform.
Thousands of businesses and enterprises trust Podbean to launch their podcasts.
Use Podbean to record your podcast.
Use Podbean AI to optimize your podcast.
Use Podbean AI to turn your blog into a podcast.
Use Podbean to distribute your podcast everywhere.
Launch your podcast on Podbean today.
Then, on the 20th of August, again in 1946, the New York Times reported that 2 US experts on aerial warfare, meaning aviation legend General Jimmy Doolittle and the president of the RCA, General David Sarnoff, arrived in Stockholm, both ostensibly on private business and independent of each other. On a quick interesting side note here, in aviation, RCA stands for root cause analysis, with it being a critical process used to identify the underlying causes of safety incidents and hazards and ensuring effective mitigation and compliance with regulations. RCA helps organisations prevent recurrence of issues by addressing systematic problems and improving safety performance. The official explanation for General Jimmy Doolittle who was now the vice president of the Shell Oil Company, being in Stockholm, was that he was inspecting Shell branch offices in Europe while the RCA General David Sarnoff, who was a former member of General Dwight D. Eisenhower's London staff, was studying the market for radio equipment. However, despite the official reasons for the two heavyweights to visit Stockholm, the Times story indicated that the chief of the Swedish Defence Staff, Lieutenant Lennart Neckman, made no secret that he wanted to talk to the two men regarding the ghost rockets phenomena, claiming that he, and I quote, was extremely interested in asking the two generals advice and, if possible, would place all available reports before them. And so both General Jimmy Doolittle and RCA General David Sarnoff were briefed on the incidents, and on several occasions they were informed that the ghost rockets themselves had also been tracked on radar, which was then followed by Sarnoff being quoted by the New York Times on the 30th of September, saying that he was, and I quote, convinced that the ghost bombs are no myth but real missiles. On the 22nd of August, again in 1946, the director of the Central Intelligence Group, or CIG for short, Lieutenant General Hoyt Vandenberg, wrote a top-secret memo to President Truman, which was perhaps based in part on information supplied from both General Jimmy Doolittle and RCA General David Sarnoff, with Lieutenant General Hoyt Vandenberg stating that the, and I quote, weight of evidence pointed to Primandun as the origin of the missiles that the US military attaché in Moscow had been told by a key Swedish air officer that radar course plotting had led to conclusion that Primanud was the launch site. The General Intelligence Group speculates that the missiles are extended range developments of V-1 being aimed for the Gulf of Bothnia for test results and do not overfly Swedish territory specifically for intimidation, self-destruct by small demolition charge, or burning. Nevertheless, there are no reports of rocket launches either at Preminud or the Gusvarda Oy after the 21st of February in 1945. Just to take us up to the break, I'm going to steer away from the Ghost Rockets incident to have a look at another strange phenomena from the skies, which is otherwise known as the Foo Fighters. And no, I'm not referring to the pop group of the same name. Although the term Foo Fighter, which was initially used to describe a type of UFO or any other type of mysterious aerial phenomena seen in the skies over Europe by the US 415th Night Fighter Squadron pilots during World War II, it was also a term that was used to describe various other air phenomena from that period, with the presumption by witnesses from the November of 1944 onwards that Foo Fighters were some form of secret weapon that were employed by the enemy. Royal Air Force personnel had first reported seeing lights following their aircraft from as early as the March of 1942, with similar sightings involving RAF bomber crews over the Balkans starting on the April of 1944, and American sightings were first recorded by crews from the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron that was stationed in occupied Belgium during the first week of the October of that same year. At the time, these strange lights were erroneously believed to be Messerschmitt Me-163 rocket-powered interceptors, which did not operate at night. However, the bulk of the sightings started occurring in the last week of November in 1944, when pilots flying over Western Europe by night reported seeing fast-moving, round-glowing objects following their aircraft. These objects were variously described as fiery by glowing red, white or orange, with some pilots describing them as resembling Christmas tree lights, and that they seemed to be toying with the aircraft before making wild turns and then simply vanishing. Some pilots and air crews also reported that these strange objects would fly together in formation with their own aircraft, and that they behaved as if they were under some sort of intelligent control, although at the same time they never displayed any hostile behaviour, which, to be honest, sounds like a good thing, because from all accounts these objects could not be outmanoeuvred or even shot down. This light show phenomena was becoming so widespread that the lights earned the name in the European theatre of operations as Kraut fireballs, but for the most part they were called Foo Fighters. The term Foo was borrowed from the 1935 American comic strip called Smokey Stoker by a radar operator in the 415th Night Fighter Squadron, Donald J. Mayers, who, according to most 415th members, gave the Foo Fighters their name, and because of the lack of a better one, it stuck. Originally, what the men of the 415th started calling these incidents was fucking Foo Fighters, but in the December of 1944, when a press correspondent from the Associated Press in Paris, a Bob Wilson, was sent to the 415th at their base to investigate this story, the term was cleaned up to just Foo Fighters. And the squadron commander, Captain Harold Asperger, also decided to sanitise the term to just Foo Fighters in the historical data of the squadron. The military took the sightings of these Foo Fighters very seriously, suspecting that the mysterious lights might be some sort of German secret weapon. However, after further investigation, it was revealed that German and Japanese pilots had also reported similar sightings. On the 13th of December in 1944, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force in Paris issued a press release which was printed in the New York Times the next day, officially describing the phenomena as a, and I quote,
new German weapon,
along with follow-up stories appearing in the New York Herald Tribune and the British Daily Telegraph using the term Foo Fighters. And in its 15th of February 1945... January, I'll try that one again. And in its 15th of January 1945 edition, Time magazine carried a story simply titled Foo Fighter, in which it reported that balls of fire had been following USAAF night fighters for over a month, and although descriptions of the phenomena had varied, the pilots agreed that the mysterious lights not only followed their aircraft closely, but also at very high speeds. The balls of fire phenomena reported to the Pacific Theatre of Operations differed somewhat from the Foo Fighters that were reported from Europe, with this ball of fire being said to resemble a large burning sphere that just hung in the sky, although it was sometimes reported to follow aircraft. And because of this, there was speculation that the phenomena could have been related to the Japanese fire balloon campaign, but as in Europe, no aircraft were ever reported as having been attacked by a ball of fire. On a quick but interesting side note here, a Japanese fire balloon, or otherwise known as an incendiary balloon or balloon bomb, is a balloon inflated with a lighter-than-air gas such as hot air, hydrogen or helium that has a bomb, incendiary device or Molotov cocktail attached to it. The balloon is then carried by the prevailing winds to the target area, where it then falls and releases its payload. The post-war Robertson panel, which was a scientific committee that met in the January of 1953, cited Foo Fighter reports and noted that their behaviour did not appear to be threatening, along with possible explanations for their existence. For example, that they were possibly an electrostatic phenomena, that was similar to St Elmo's fire, an electromagnetic phenomena, or simply reflections of light from ice crystals, with the panel's report also suggesting that if the term flying saucer had been popular in 1943 to 1945, these objects would have been so labelled. And on another quick interesting side note here, St Elmo's fire, which is also known as corpuscent, Hermes fire, witch fire or witch's fire, is a weather phenomena in which luminous plasma is created by a corona discharge from a rod-like object such as a mast, spire, chimney or even an animal horn in an atmospheric electric field. It has been observed on the leading edges of aircraft and by US Air Force pilots. But it wasn't just the Robertson Committee that were questioned regarding the Foo Fighter phenomena, as in the early autumn of 1945, a group of scientists, engineers and former high-ranking Luftwaffe officers were also questioned about the wartime balls of fire by staff from United States Air Force in Europe's intelligence section. However, none of the 13 officers interviewed claimed to have any knowledge of any German secret weapons program that could have explained these sightings. After this second short break, in part 3, we will go back to looking at this ghost rockets phenomena and how the sightings affected the world stage.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk. Or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future. They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights, ghost hunting events. Remember, only the original will do.
Although the official opinion of both the Swedish and US military remains unclear, a top-secret United States Air Force Europe document from the 4th of November in 1948 indicates that at least some investigators believe that the ghost rockets, along with the later flying saucer sightings, were indeed extraterrestrial in origin, with a declassified document from 1997 stating, and I quote, "For some time we have been concerned by the recurring reports on flying saucers. They periodically continue to crop up. During the last week, one was observed hovering over Neuberberg Air Base for about 30 minutes. They have been reported by so many sources and from such a variety of places that we are convinced that they cannot be disregarded and must be explained on some basis which is perhaps slightly beyond the scope of our present intelligence thinking. When the officers of this directorate recently visited the Swedish Air Intelligence Service, this question was put to the Swedes. Their answer was that some dependable and fully technically qualified people have reached a conclusion that
these phenomena are obviously the result of a high technical skill which cannot be credited to any presently known culture on Earth.
They are therefore assuming that these objects originate from some previously unknown or unidentified technology, possibly outside of the Earth. And not only that, but this top-secret United States Air Force Europe document, again from the 4th of November in 1948, also mentions a search for an object that crashed into a Swedish lake conducted by a Swedish Navy salvage team, with the discovery of a previously unknown crater on the lake floor believed to have been caused by this event, which is possibly referring to the aforementioned Lake Kolnjarv in Sweden and their search for a ghost rocket. However, the date of this incident is unclear. The top-secret United States Air Force Europe document ends with the statement that, and I quote, "We are inclined not to discredit entirely this somewhat spectacular theory of extraterrestrial origins, and in the meantime, keeping an open mind on the subject." The ghost rocket phenomena, along with the reports, were not just confined to the Scandinavian countries as similar objects, but also reported earlier by British Army units in Greece, especially around what's that place called? Sorry. Thessaloniki in northern Greece. Thank you. And in an interview on the 5th of September in 1946, the Greek Prime Minister Konstantinos Soldaris likewise reported a number of projectiles that had been seen over Macedonia and Thessaloniki from the 1st of September that same year. And by mid-September, these strange objects were also seen in Portugal, Belgium and in northern Italy. I'm just going to take another short break from the ghost rocket phenomena and talk a little bit about what is now known as, but not talked about as much, and that is the 1954 Greek UFO flap. And although there were several UAP sightings that year, I want to concentrate on one particular sighting that happened above a football stadium in Florence, Italy. It was on the 27th of October in 1954 in Tuscany when the Fiorentina Football Club was playing against its local rival, Pistoiese. Pistoiese, is that right? Pistoiese? 10,000 fans were watching the concrete bowl of the Stadio Artemi Franchi, but just after half-time, the stadium suddenly felt eerily quiet, which was then followed by a roar that went up from the crowd. But the spectators were no longer watching the match, but instead they were looking up at the sky with their fingers pointing upwards, and the players, well, they suddenly stopped playing, and the ball, well, it rolled to a standstill. One of the footballers on the pitch, a Mr. Adico Magnini, who was something of a legend at the club and had played for Italy at the 1954 World Cup, said of the moment, and I quote, "I remember everything from A to Z. It was something that looked like an egg that was moving slowly. Everyone was looking up, and also there was some glitter coming from the sky, silver glitter. We were astonished. We had never seen anything like it before. We were absolutely shocked." And as you could probably imagine, and according to the referee's match report for that day, play was then suspended simply because the spectators saw something in the sky. Among the crowd was a gentleman going by the name of Gigi Boni, who was a lifelong Fiorentina fan, who described the multiple objects in the sky as, and I quote, "They just reminded me of Cuban cigars, but they looked way in the way they looked." He continues, and again I quote, "I think they were extraterrestrial. That's what I believe, and there was no other explanation I can give myself." At the time of the incident, newspapers spoke of aliens from Mars, but of course now we know that's probably not the case. However, going by the reports from the day, I think it's safe to say that whatever it was that everyone witnessed that day, it was both an intelligent and technological phenomena that cannot be linked with anything we know on Earth, both back in 1954 and even today. Back to the ghost rockets. And after the Swedish and US military conducted their investigations into the phenomena, the Greek government also decided to have a look into what was causing the strange lights, with their leading scientist and physicist Paul Santorini in charge of operations. On a short but interesting side note here, Paul Santorini had been a developer of the proximity fuse on the first A-bomb and held patents on guided systems for both Nike missiles and radar systems. However, it wasn't until a 1967 lecture to the Greek Astronomical Society, which was broadcast on Athens radio, that Paul Santorini first publicly revealed what had been found during his 1947 investigation into the ghost rocket phenomena, saying that, and I quote, We soon established that they were not missiles, but before we could do any more, the army, after conferring with foreign officials, presumably from the US Defense Department, ordered the investigation stopped." He continues, and again I quote, "Foreign scientists from Washington flew to Greece for secret talks with me." And later, Paul Santorini told UFO researchers that secrecy was invoked because officials were afraid to admit of a superior technology against which we have no possibility of defence.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 171, we are going to be looking at the Gola clan. The Gola clan is a family group living in Nova Scotia, Canada, known for their intergenerational poverty and the conviction in the 1980s of many family members for intimate violence and interfamily relationships. The family became infamously known in the 1980s, following a series of criminal cases that exposed their isolated and impoverished living conditions, as well as alarming instances of abuse within the family.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciations were me, all me. The voices in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Poolar, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley, and of course a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you do know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters, and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I'll see what I can do. I'll also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast, if they're happy for me to do so, of course. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. No AI was used or harmed in the making of this or any other episode of Mark's Unexplained World. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.